to our fifth writing gab. My name is Joe Lennon, and I'm with Abigail Mokara, and we are the Masaryk University Writing Lab, and we're here to help you with your writing at all stages and all kinds of writing. We're also here in these writing gabs to sort of create a community of writers to share our tips and thoughts about how to write better, and to hear, of course, from you guys as well about what has worked for you, what has not worked, and these sorts of things, so we can share ideas. So the theme that we decided on today is revision, because obviously it's a very important step in the writing process, and a step that we realize from our own experience and from our experience as teachers, it's a step we realize that often isn't given maybe as much time as it should be, and maybe also strikes a little bit of fear in the hearts of every writer, especially when we are looking at that page of writing that we've done. Somehow we've managed to produce something, but we maybe don't know what it is yet. Maybe we are worried because last time we turned in something, our paper looked something like this when it came back, and this sort of sea of red marks, maybe. And so we are worried that that's going to happen again, and we don't know what to do about it. So this has happened to all of us, I think. Whoa. And so we thought it would be a kind of sort of fun and practical way to organize the talk into this idea: if you only have a week to revise, 2 days, an hour, or 5 minutes. So I'm gonna start and cover the first 2 time periods, and then Abby's gonna take over and talk about the last minute things you can do. Because we know that in real life, you may not have all the time that you wish you had to revise your paper and make it the best it can be. And then we're gonna turn it over to you guys, hopefully, and we'll have we'll hear from you what strategies have worked for you, and maybe get some good discussion going. So the first important thing before we get into the specific tips is it's really important to think of your paper in the right way and get into the right mood and attitude for revising. And it's hard because I think it's, especially when we get a paper back like this, for example, from a professor or a teacher in the past, this has happened to all of us, and it's covered in these red marks, right? And it's really tempting to say, oh my God, I have to go through each sentence here, each line, fix these things one at a time. And that's the only way to fix this paper. Of course, that's not true. And it can be really unhelpful to see every potential problem with the paper as equal, right, when you're revising. So it helps to have some categories for creating priorities, right? So in our writing classes, Abby and I talk about 2 ideas: macro elements and micro elements, right? And this is a way of theorizing or thinking about the aspects or the elements of your text, right? And deciding which ones are the most important to focus on. So macro elements are the big picture. So you might be asking questions like this: did I follow the assignment? Does my argument make sense? Do I have the right tone? These are issues that involve the whole paper, the sort of overall feeling of the paper, right, or the text. And then you have the micro elements, and we could call these the little details, right? Is this the right word to use here? Should I put a comma here or a semicolon? Is this cited correctly? Now, out of the micro and macro elements, which one do you think is probably the most important to focus on if you have the time? And which one is probably the most important to focus on if you don't have the time, if maybe you only have 5 minutes? So that's something to think about. And the answer is probably that if you have the time and if you have the mental space, it's probably best to focus on the macro elements first, right? And we're going to show you some ways of thinking about those. But if it's the last minute, then maybe you're better off focusing on some of these micro elements first. You know, little details that might make a big difference if when your teacher or professor is looking at that paper. Of course, that's only one way to think about it, and sometimes, you know, it's good to go back and forth between the micro and macro elements. So, you know, we might talk a little bit about that later, but this is a good distinction to start with. And here's another way of looking at it that I found online. This adds another aspect, but it's basically a similar idea. It's important to categorize the issues that you want to talk about or that you want to work on with the paper and prioritize, okay? So don't get sidetracked, don't get bogged down by all the little details. And don't go through your paper sentence by sentence necessarily and think that's the best way to revise. There are other strategies to use as well. So, okay, we decided that each of our time periods that we're going to talk about would have a sort of theme, things that we would do or things that we would focus on, things that we would prioritize if we had this amount of time to work on our writing. And we decided that if you have a week, I mean, you know, that may not actually seem like that much of a time, really, but on the other hand, in some ways, I think that's quite a generous amount of time, right? In some cases, like to have a week to revise is a luxury, maybe, for some of us. By the way, everything that I think we're talking about in these tips and strategies, we tried to come up with things that would be applicable to really any kind of text. But, you know, you might have to, we're going to show some specific examples, and you might have to sort of adapt some of them to your particular text. But no matter how long it is, even if it's really short or, you know, even thesis length, I think most of these strategies will apply. Anyway, if you have a week, so one thing that we realized, or we have realized, is really useful, and I think anyone who has done this has realized is useful, is giving your paper to a friend, to a colleague, to a classmate, and getting their opinion and view on it, right? Because no matter how many times you read your paper, sometimes the more you read your paper, the less you're able to see what issues it might have and what things you might need to work on. So it's really important, if you have the ability, to maybe try to get over that fear of showing your work to other people, and give your paper to somebody who can give you some good specific feedback. But we also know from experience that sometimes what happens is you say, here, can you read my paper and tell me what's wrong with it, right? And what you get back is maybe, oh, I don't know, it's pretty good. It looks good to me, right? Or even worse, oh yeah, it's pretty bad. Sorry, man, you have a lot of work to do, or something like that. Okay, and hopefully we realize those responses aren't very helpful. So how do you get better feedback on your text than just, well, it's good, or I don't know, it's bad? There's other problems that can come up when we are working on a piece, and maybe we have some time to work on it, but we realize there's still things that need to be done. Maybe it's too short for the assignment. Maybe you have no idea whether it's good or not. Again, these are all things that you can get help with if you allow another set of eyes, another brain, another sensibility to look at your text. Who can you get good feedback from? Well, so we recommend giving it to a smart person, of course. And I think it's a really good idea to give it to somebody who's outside your field, because they will be able to see maybe where you are not explaining something that well, right? Maybe where you're using extremely technical language, right? That actually doesn't properly get the point across, right? Because you assume your readers will understand exactly what you mean. Both Abbie and I, in the last week, heard from students who said, actually, I give my text to my mom because she doesn't really know what it's about, but she can really tell me immediately where the trouble is, where the good parts are. So she gives me really good feedback. So we both thought that was an awesome idea, right? So maybe give it to your mom. But again, this question is, how do you get specific and useful feedback? And the answer to that is asking specific questions of your reader, okay? Instead of just handing it to them and saying, okay, can you just read this and tell me what you think? Because a sort of vague, general question like that is likely to get vague, general feedback. So here are some questions that I ask my students when they're doing peer review. I ask them to think about these questions a lot. And I think these would be good questions for pretty much any reader, to get them to kind of prompt your reader to point out and highlight specific parts of the text. So these are just 4 questions. And another important thing is that you want to get positive feedback as well. And this is another problem when you give your text to another reader, is sometimes they may just say, well, here's the problem, here's a problem, oh, here's another problem. And yes, that might be helpful, but also it's really good when you're revising to realize what you did well. So here are 4 questions, and the first 2 are sort of getting your reader to hopefully focus on things that you did well. And the last 2 maybe are getting them to focus on things that need work. So I like this question. So what I have here is you could type this on the bottom of your essay, for example, so that your reader has some specific prompts, and ask them to. The key again is to get them to point out to specific places in your text, right? Because that's where that's how you're going to know where to focus, right? Instead of just saying, well, in general, it was sort of good, right? Because again, that's not very helpful. So I ask these questions. Where do you feel the heat? And what I mean is, where are you most excited? Where are you most interested? And maybe it's one paragraph, right? Ask them to find which paragraph or which sentence or phrase is the second question. Did you most get excited, interested? Where do you think the most useful or most interesting part of the text is? And that's your way of, again, knowing what you did well and getting some positive feedback. And then the second 2 questions: where do you feel lost or confused? Can you circle? Can you highlight a place where you didn't follow the argument maybe? And where do you want more? And this is going to help you a lot for if you are a little bit short on that word count. to find out a place where you can add more. And believe me, you can always add more. We're going to talk in a moment about how sometimes when you have too much, you might need to cut that down. But maybe if you still have a week to work on it, and especially if you're sort of low on the word count, it could be really helpful to know where could I add more explanation, more examples, more details, and get them to explain and comment on it, right? So, and these days, well, actually now in the Czech Republic, we can meet in person, so that's nice. You can meet in the pub finally over a beer with your reader, but of course you can meet online on Zoom. And yeah, we recommend if you have a reader for your paper, ideally it's a classmate or a friend where maybe they can also are working on something. You can swap papers and get a fair exchange, and you can give them feedback and they can give you feedback. No matter how it works, a good first question I think to ask your reader if you can meet in person is, can you summarize my main point in your own words? And this is a great question because you can listen to what they have said. Oh, I think your main point was this. And if it is your main point, if this is the thing that you wanted to get across, great. If not, then you might realize you have some work to do to try to make that point clearer. Okay, now let's go to 2 days. Maybe we're in a little bit tighter time period, and we need to. We don't have the luxury maybe of having time to ask a friend to read it, meet with them. So now it's kind of the up to you period. And so we thought for this amount of time, a good idea would be to take a trip to the sentence hospital. That means fixing these sorts of problems on the sentence and structural level, but you still have time to do if you have 2 days, and I think time to do well. So this is maybe if you have the opposite problem, right? Your texts are too long, right? And you need to somehow reduce the word count. Or maybe you read them and they sound bad, they don't flow, the main point is unclear. So maybe the next thing to do is to look at your sentences. The first thing probably is to read it out loud, and this is probably the #1 recommendation that we have for revision, I would say. I always ask students who come to the writing lab or who are asking me about how, what do I do with this text? I always say, read it out loud. It might be kind of embarrassing at first if you're, hearing your own words out in the air, but that's good, because if it is maybe embarrassing, or if you stumble over some words, or you realize, oh, these are too long and confusing, every sentence starts the same way. I would like to, I would like to, I would like to. These are things sometimes that you won't notice just by reading silently your text, and you will notice them immediately if you read out loud. So read it out loud. And then there are some other visual things that you can do also if you realize there might be some issues with your sentences. So I just want to quickly show you some of the things that I've done. If you're working on Microsoft Word, then it's really easy to color the text in different ways. And you can look for patterns. You can look for repeated ideas. And this sometimes can really help you, or different aspects of your text. And this can really help you figure out how to, recognize problems maybe, and then start to think about how to fix them. So one thing that I always look for is repetition. And I just wanted to show you, this is some paragraph that I was working on with a student. And one thing that I asked them to do was to highlight the repeated words. Okay, I will present, self-help books, arguments. Hopefully you can see here, these red words are the repeated words. Now, just because a word is repeated doesn't mean that it's bad. Sometimes you have to repeat key words. But if you notice that a lot of phrases are repeated, that might be a sign that you don't need both of those words, right? Maybe you can reduce it, cut it down, and combine the sentences maybe. So that could be a first step. Another thing to look for in this second example is similar ideas, okay? And I colored the similar ideas in different colors. So in this case, for example, the student wrote in one sentence, the economic system of our society. In the next sentence, they wrote neoliberal governance. And I remember I asked the student, wait, so are those the same thing? Like when you say the economic system of our society, do you mean neoliberal governance? And they said, oh yeah, actually, yeah. So I asked them to consider whether, so this is a case where you state it generally, right, the economic system, and then give a specific name. And I always think if you can somehow cut out the general and just immediately go lightning fast to the specific, sometimes that's a really great way to reduce the word count, reduce the confusion. So these are just a couple examples. Another color coding thing that works is if you're making an argument, asking this question, are my claims connected to my evidence? So you can color what you see as your claims in one color and then color your evidence in another color. And I did this recently with when I was working with students on cover letters. So again, I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but in this case, I colored the claims in orange, I colored the evidence for those claims in purple, and I colored the specific details green. And one thing that I noticed, for example, in this text is there's a couple claims, but they're very similar. Maybe I don't need to say both of those claims, and they're not very clearly connected to the evidence, right? For example, in this first paragraph, there's no claim. There's lots of evidence and details, but they're not connected to a claim. So this could help you. Or for example, your paragraphs, go through, highlight the main point in each paragraph, see if you can find it. Again, if it's missing, if it's not there, that might be a sign that you need to make that clearer.
And for example, if I can just jump in with one statement before you move on, Joe. Sure. The reason why I think this is so helpful for the specific genre or style of writing that a cover letter would include is because statistically, on average, studies have shown that most employers, HR representatives, spend about 6 seconds glancing at every cover letter and every CV they receive for a job. So to be really concise and to the point about your argument and your evidence up front and more quickly, and maybe not repeating it twice, is going to make that letter more concise and could perhaps even increase your likelihood of getting that position that you would like. So yeah, maybe you can continue on, Joe. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Abbie. No, it's a really good point. Thank you. Another sort of sentence issue that makes a big difference. Again, this is an example to go back to the micro and macro. These are examples of maybe things that are sort of micro issues, tiny little word choice and sentence issues. But over the course of the whole paper, if this happens again and again, then it sort of turns into a macro issue. We get the sense, your reader might get the sense, this is kind of a confusing paper, I can't follow the argument. And sometimes that's maybe because you do need to add more, like I said in the last section, you might need to add more examples and that might need to argue a bit better. But sometimes it really might be the organization of your sentences. One really useful concept that whenever I show this to students, they always say, wow, I never thought about it this way. This is really useful. It's called the known new contract. And this is about how essentially the idea is you put the already known, the already understood idea at the beginning of your sentence, and then the new idea, the new information, you put it at the end of your sentence. Then in the next sentence, you refer back to the end of the previous sentence, the new idea, and now that's the known idea. And then at the end of the new sentence, you introduce the new idea. And here's an example. I'll just read this because maybe you can see quickly how it works. Accounts of depression evolved after psychologists introduced the concepts of defeat and entrapment. These concepts, okay, so I'm referring back to the stressed or the new information in the previous paragraph, have been implicated in theoretical accounts of anxiety and suicide. Such theories, blah, 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 blah. So using pronouns and using sentence structure to sort of emphasize your argument is another thing you can work on. Finally, for this series of sort of sentence work, you can follow one of my favorite methods for revision. And some of my students are probably here, and this week you got a heavy dose of Lanham's paramedic method. But I think it's really useful. Just to show you quickly how it works, Lanham asks you to find prepositional phrases, to be verbs, so like these sort of weak to be verbs like is and are, and then the most evil are nominalizations, according to Lanham. These are words that could be expressed in verbs, but instead they've been turned into nouns. So this is just an example of a sentence that is sort of unnecessarily long, uses a lot of these weak verbs, and in some cases, not enough verbs, and these nominalizations. So a decrease in the use of plastic straws by Czechs was observed in 2018 in comparison with 2017. If we operate Lanham's paramedic method on it, we get something much faster, nicer, cleaner. Czechs used fewer plastic straws in 2018 than in 2017. If you want to know more about Lanham's method, you can watch a video that I made on the Masaryk Writing Center YouTube channel. And by the way, I should have said this earlier, we're going to share, as we usually do, the video of our session, and we'll also share, if you wish, the handout that we've made. And we have some links to further resources for you on this. So I think that's all for me. And I think now it's time for Abbie to show you what happens when you don't have the luxury of all this wonderful time and you really need to do some quick work on your papers.
Yeah, indeed. So like Joe, I also focus on the bigger issues when I have the time, but I also like to, especially for this exercise, put on my student hat and think of myself as the last minute girl type of student. What can I really do to improve that piece of writing before I submit it to whomever it's intended, right? So we decided to try the 1 hour rescue mission method. And for this, rather than looking at really specific macro and micro types of issues that would take more time to focus on, we're trying to conserve time. So we're looking at what should I do first and what should I do second, because I don't have a lot of time, right? So I've divided it into like a first goal and a second goal. So my advice, when you don't have a lot of time, you have 1 hour, you're trying to rescue and recover those bits of your essay that you can still improve in the last moments before you turn it in. That first goal that I would suggest is to look for the quick fix or anything that's missing. But of course, that can be rather vague. So perhaps I'm gonna take over and switch my screen. When we have this rescue mission, again, looking for the quick fix or the goal that's missing, what does that really mean when we take it out of abstract terms? And one of the things that I like to do first is to focus on, in terms of what's missing, have I really answered the question, the assignment, or the writing prompt? Of course, trying to apply this to a wide variety of different types of writing projects at different levels. So this specific terminology is going to differ based on what that assignment is. But nevertheless, what I like to do is a specific type of example where I go back to that initial example class writing prompt, whatever it may be. If it's, for example, for your thesis, if it's an assignment given by your professor at the undergraduate or the graduate level, I like to go back and reread it after I've written my final work, just to make sure that I am indeed covering everything that they have asked. Sometimes that doesn't always happen because you get really inspired by an idea and you get a little bit carried away and you end up writing sometimes even a fantastic paper, but you haven't covered all the issues that you could potentially deal with in terms of actually responding to the prompt. So I've given you an example, putting again on my student hat, an example of an actual class writing prompt that I have received recently, and that was to write a short response paper examining or explaining how some of the authors in my dissertation project work with or deal with issues of editing and revision. And here, what's implied, but sometimes not often stated, or it could be stated, is that I need to be specific about how these authors cooperate with publishing editors. So I've given you here a sample of that precise essay that I ended up writing, which of course, the first thing I'm going to check is, do I have a title? But perhaps that's more for the 5-minute method. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the beginning, the middle, and the end. But more specifically, I'm going to look at my opening sentence, my topic sentence to my essay prompt. Then I'm going to go right into the middle where I feel like I am making my main point, my main claim, or my main response to whatever it is I need to respond to based on that writing prompt. And here I've highlighted it for you. So what's in yellow, this is how I'm introducing my topic, and I need to make sure indeed that I'm including, for example, all details there. Did I mention an author? Did I mention what type of author that, you know, tends to be, for example? Is he more inclined to be working with editors or disinclined to be working with editors? And obviously this topic sentence is going to vary based on the length of the assignment, the type of the assignment, and the level of study. And then I jump down here to what I believe is my main point or main argument or main statement as a part of this assignment. And I divided it into 2 different parts because here I've set up what I believe the problem to be, and here I've argued essentially how the author that I chose for this writing prompt responded to that problem. So quickly, I read through a topic sentence, I read through my main argument, my main point, and then I jump down to my conclusion and I read, of course, the first sentence of my conclusion, or if it's a relatively short paragraph, I read through that paragraph. What I've noticed in this is that I ended in a quotation, which sometimes can be helpful, but it's not always recommended because here I've ended my paper or my essay or response with somebody else's words and not my own. So here is a moment when I could take 1 or 2 minutes or 5 minutes to really try to add 1 more or 2 more final sentences to really wrap up my paper. And I want to check again that I've responded to the main prompt, which was, to remind you, be specific about how these authors cooperate with publishing editors. Even though I've explained how they deal in general with issues of editing and revision, I explained that this author does not like to revise or edit. So, as a last-minute effort to try to add 1 more sentence to improve the way that my conclusion looks, I'm happy with my opening sentence here. I think I need to add 2 more just at the end, so I call this slapping on a band-aid conclusion. So I make shortly here a transition sentence. So while this author thought, for example, that he could opt out of the option to continue to produce literature, it had the opposite effect, essentially. The public wouldn't let him go. And then here in red, this is my band-aid. Editors, on the other hand, specifically referring to them, had an easier time ignoring the silence of the author. They simply moved on to other contemporary authors, many of whom were much easier to work with by comparison. So while certainly some of your professors at varying levels might argue, hey, this part should be perhaps up here in your argument, it's still going to be a better outcome for you as a student when you have addressed it at least somewhere And where better than the conclusion as a final thought, as an area for further research, as an area that could be explored, but you chose to go another way, or as an area that you try to wrap up in a quick, neat, and tidy way. Because of course, you do not have a lot of time. So it is perhaps the best that we could do in this moment if you have 1 hour. You would receive the feedback from the professor indeed that maybe you should move this particular bit of text, but that feedback would be slightly better than, hey, Abbie, you actually forgot to respond to this part of the prompt where we wanted you to be specific about the editors and their cooperation. So I've bailed myself out at the last minute with one sentence. So I call this method slapping on a Band-Aid type of conclusion. If we had more time, obviously we could do something more along the lines of what Joe suggested, and I could continue color coding my paper and see where I could perhaps work that into this main point or main argument or backbone of my paper, but we simply don't have that time in 1 hour. Then another quick fix within 1 hour, especially if you have time to think about it, is you can come up with some last minute emergency titles. Perhaps you've noticed that your main essay here lacks a title. You have forgotten to include one because you've been so engrossed in the writing assignment. Most students or academics or people in general do not begin with the title. It's something that happens generally more naturally at the end because it's supposed to wrap up the kind of spirit of the paper in general, or the theme. So if you've forgotten that title, I can give you 2 quick fixes for suggestion. If you have more time, obviously you can do something a bit more interesting, but the first idea is just to use that main research question or topic idea as a title, which is essentially what I did. I'm claiming that the author is tediously or annoyingly silent. It's a very quick title, perhaps not the best, but it was a quick one. The other perhaps thing that you can do is you can look at the topic you're talking about and then insert this famous colon that is so common and pervasive among academic literature, let's say. Introduce that famous colon and then what you are saying about it. So it's the what am I talking about, colon, what am I saying about it type of structure. And oftentimes this can allow you to make a really quick title in just about 1 or 2 minutes. It might end up being a little bit long. It might sound like a sentence, but of course this is better than no title at all, because you want to have a title when you turn in that final bit of writing to your professor, advisor, or intended audience. So
yeah, and it's so much better. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
Well, first of all, I liked your, just to give an example, I liked your example that you shared with me yesterday, Abbie, of like one of these types of titles. For example, tigers, colon, why are they dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And yes, maybe it's sort of cheesy, but at least there's a title there. And I know Abbie and I are always, you know,
Yes,
getting papers without titles. And we're like, no, come on, all it takes is maybe 30 seconds to think of at least something to put there. And
yeah. All it takes is to try, right? Because the feedback you get on perhaps a title you can improve is, hey, improve your title. But the feedback you get on no title is, what's wrong with you? You forgot to include a title. So it is an important detail to try to work out at the last minute, even if it does sound quite cheesy, like tigers, colon, the most dangerous cat on the planet. The other thing you can do, or the second goal I would focus on if you have 1 hour and you're still in this rescue and recovery mission, is to do a last minute grammar check. It seems like a really basic thing, but it can take you perhaps more time or less time based on your particular writing and how long it is. So I advise maybe focusing on this in 1 hour. And a great source for this is Grammarly, obviously, in addition to some other free spell check tools from Microsoft Office and Google Suite. And you can check for some obvious errors that you can fix quickly. These would be minor mistakes in your writing, perhaps because you are like me, one of those people who write just like you speak, and you can make the occasional typo or the occasional verb doesn't agree with the subject. You can fix it quickly if Grammarly helps you out. But if there are very long conditionals or maybe more complicated aspects of tense that still confuse you, even if you use Grammarly, you can just have an idea, okay, perhaps this area, and this area is going to have a bit of a grammar mistake, but I'm not sure how I can fix it quickly. So I'm just going to focus on the obvious errors and I'm going to move on. Yeah. Now, when you have 5 minutes, if you're a student like me who either has waited until the last 5 minutes or you're a diligent student and you want to do a last 5-minute check, we call it the cosmetic check, because really you're looking for, at this point, as Joe mentioned, the micro issues. There is simply not enough time left for you to focus on the macro issues. If you get your paper back for revision, which is an excellent practice if professors are inclined to do so, then you can focus on macro. But for now, 5 minutes, let's look at the micro issues with the smaller details. So what that would look like is, I advise again, a first goal and a second goal. What should I do first? What should I do second? The first goal is maybe something quite obvious, but Joe and I tend to encounter this a lot among the students that we have in our writing courses. There's not enough time or focus, attention paid to the spelling issues, which seems like maybe a trivial thing, but actually it can really make a significant difference in terms of the impact on your professor or audience when they receive your paper and they're going to give you a grade or a final mark or some feedback. If you have many glaring or significant spelling errors, they're likely to kind of focus on these spelling errors instead of focus on the thing you want them to, which is the main point or argument that you're trying to make. So how can you eliminate those kind of quickly and effectively before you turn it in? You can do two things. Again, I emphasize effective, not just quick. So the first thing is change your document language to English. In Microsoft Word, there is an option at the very bottom of the word processing program on the bottom left. You can change your document language to English. If you've already written your document language in your native language, Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Finnish, Japanese, whatever it might be. If you've already written it in this language and you switch your document language to English afterwards, it's not going to make a difference. What you need to do is highlight all the text you've written, then change your document language to English, and then run the spell check program again in Microsoft Word. This is going to be how you're going to catch those issues. So make sure that you change the document language at the right time, or that you're, again, highlighting all the text you need to check. The second thing I always advise, because from a technological point of view, we don't always have the most up-to-date dictionaries in Microsoft Word for a variety of reasons I'm not going to go into now. So I advise students, I advise myself, this is something I do myself, double up. Use 2 different spell check programs. And the one I like to advise for students of this particular university, or perhaps students in general, because anybody can make a free Google account, is to use Google Docs, because they have the ability to change the document language quickly into English by simply setting English as one of the languages of your main Google account. And then the Google Docs spell check will run simultaneously. You do not need to click a button per se in every case. It will tell you, or it will highlight the words in red or in blue based on the type of issue as you are literally writing. So you can copy everything out of Word and put it into Google Docs, or vice versa. And I advise using both, because Google Docs can catch some things that Word cannot. And on the other hand, Word can sometimes catch some things that Google Docs cannot. So the other thing I recommend, the second goal, if you have that time when you're doing your cosmetic check, is look at these smaller aesthetic details, as we've called them, which is maybe a rather arbitrary term, but it's really more cosmetic and aesthetic. Look at these details that will add some quick, essential improvement to your assignment. So the first thing that we like to, well, it's not first, but it's very important. We like to advise is to check your speech marks, your quotation marks, because in the English language, we use either the double quotation up here for the American style, or we use the single quotation here at the top for the British style. That changes with in-text citation, but you don't need to worry about that. But just check that you don't have what we like to call the notorious Czech and Slovak quotation style, where these are often inverted and you have the first one at the bottom and the second one at the top, but it's going the other way. So it's just one really small fix that you can make that makes your paper look tremendously better in the English language, more seamless and less like Czenglish or Slovakish. I'm not really sure how we would call that yet, but indeed, like Czenglish. and then check.
Sorry, and Abbie,
Yeah.
sorry, I was just wanted to say that's another thing, that if you change your document language to English before you start writing, which we always
Yes.
recommend, not at the last minute, then it will fix that for you. You don't even have to worry about it. It will automatically give you the English punctuation and these sorts of things.
Yeah, indeed. That's a huge benefit if you can do it before, if you can remember to do it before. And then make sure that you have properly indented your paragraphs or your titles, for example, that you've made them bold or whatever it needs to be according to the citation style. Make sure that everything kind of looks in this uniform style. If you quickly scan through your document and check how everything looks. Then, of course, check your font. Make sure that in one section you haven't left in Times New Roman, and in another section you've written in Arial, simply because you're combining documents. It seems like a simple thing, but just to make sure you highlight all that text and select more or less the same font. Also check your font size. If this is something that needs to change based on your citation style, you should respect it. But most papers are going to use the same font size throughout the entire document. Either your text will be in boldface or it will be in not boldface. And then finally, do you have simple things? But you'd be surprised how often, unfortunately, we receive writing assignments that are otherwise excellent that omit these things. Do you have a title, which we went over? Is your name on the document? Did you take credit for your work? Is there a date? Is there a word count? Is there a bibliography? All these types of stylistic things that go into finally submitting your paper. Don't forget to include that bibliography, even if you put it into a separate document, or perhaps you've forgotten to do it and you can put together a quick list of sources rather than focusing on the writing, even if that list of sources is just the hyperlink. It's better than not using any citation at all. Okay. I think that concludes it for me for the quick check, because really there's not much you can do in 5 minutes or 1 hour, but those things that we pointed out to you can really make a significant difference in terms of the feedback that you will get from your professor. It will allow the professor or the audience to focus more on the actual writing that you have done, the arguments you've made, the statements that you've critically thought through in your text, and they will be less distracted by something like spelling errors or missing titles or strangely indented paragraphs or bizarre font sizes, okay? And then we wanted to leave you with this rather inspiring quote that I thought was quite pertinent to today's talk. Oftentimes when you're revising, the more you leave out, especially related to perhaps nhams method, the more you leave out, the more you actually highlight what you are leaving into your assignment, okay? So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for now, and perhaps we can turn it over to you to see if you have any questions, because a lot of the advice we presented was we had to choose some things in the interest of time. We could not cover everything, so there are certainly some things that we can still offer advice on at this moment. And we want to hear about your specific revision processes. How do you do it? How do you revise? Are you a last minute girl like me? Or are you a long, pensive, thought-provoking, responsible writer like Joe?
Before, I do want to hear from everybody. Just one last reminder, please, before you leave, I popped a link just now into the chat. Please, 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 we need to know that you were here, and we need to know how you found out about us, so that we can tell the powers that be, and we can convince them that we were doing something interesting. So thanks it'll take you 2 seconds to fill that out. Just please do that before you leave. And then, yeah, so we want to hear from you. Strategies, ideas, comments, questions.
Hi, maybe I could start. We met with Joe before, so I'm really happy to hear you again, because I didn't know who will teach the class. But yeah, actually I wrote my last article 4 days ago, and yeah, I'm more type like Abbie, so when the deadline is at midnight, I will finish it 5 minutes before midnight, or 1 minute. And actually, my last day was like I was writing or revising my paper 6 hours before finishing. But actually, I had the time for revision like for 1 week, because what you said, I sent it to my friend or to my classmate from my doctor classes or PhD, and also I sent it to my supervisor of my PhD. And what was interesting fact that my PhD revisor, she just corrected some like commas or small things. She didn't check the context, I thought. But my friend, she made like a red ocean of my paper. But actually for me it was really helpful, because I thought that she was really thinking about what I was saying. So maybe this was the point. What was what you were trying to say? So that, and I thought like, okay, fine. It will take me like 1 hour to revise, but the more I tried to write the sentence better or to find better article to describe it or something, the more hours it took. But actually I was really happy for the revision, how I made it. So my aim was to know what I did wrong and what could I do better, not to be in such a hurry. So thank you to summarize how can I do it, because yeah, there is
Yeah.
lots to improve. But I know that this is kind of my writing style that I won't change, because every time when I do it, I'd say, yes, it was for the last time, I will prepare in advance. But no, it's kind of my personality, I think.
But yeah,
So
well, thanks, Mihaela, for confirming what we said, right? And I think that's absolutely true, because sometimes your professors, unfortunately, it's the way it is. I mean, maybe that even they would like to give you more detailed feedback, but you know, they just don't have the time, or they are also a student themselves, right? And they just are buried by work. So that's why reaching out to a colleague, of course, everybody's busy, but maybe a colleague will actually have more time for you to actually think about the issues in your paper. So great.
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think that those feedback questions that Joe has given, certainly I think he would be okay with you stealing them and copying them out of the resources, because if you did get your revision back from your friend who is, you know, near and dear to you, who took the time to make an ocean of red, that's a lot of effort, but at the same time it's really daunting, especially when you don't have a lot of time to fix all that red. So even I think Joe's suggestions for how to get the feedback more on this macro level of what could you improve to make your paper more impactful or make more sense or be more clear in certain areas might help to overcome that feeling of even imposter syndrome when you get back that paper that's just full of red marks. I've certainly received those before, and even the mentality of going into the revision process is like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
oh man.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but also what was really helpful for me, I don't know if the others know it, but now we have rightful paid from our faculty or from our university, and this is especially based on revision from scientific data or articles. And this was also very helpful for me. So the last revision made this program, and I think that they are thinking about to pay it for a longer period, but now it is just till the 14th of December. So maybe it will help somebody if you don't know.
It could. That would be a really nice suggestion, for example. Even if it's not paid by the university, perhaps in the future it could be again. And
Sure.
we had put together a list of writing resources based on a previous GAB we did, I believe, in June. But we should certainly make perhaps an update to that list of resources where we could include things that you actually use as students at every level because we don't always know, I don't always know about everything students are using, for example. So thanks for that. I'm going to include it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hi, can I just follow what Michaela just said? Actually, that was one of my questions that I wanted to ask, because I've been using Grammarly for the past couple of years, including the free version and also the paid version. But I was not really happy about the paid version, to be honest, because some of the suggestions, like passive voice and so on, non-stop corrections like that, I was not really convinced that it's actually giving me the right advice that I needed. Of course, for the basic errors, that's fine. But I also heard about this Rightful, and I wanted to ask what's your experience, or if there's any other editor that we could use. But from what I heard, what Michaela said, that Rightful is actually available, or was available until 14th of December, you said. I think, I'm not sure if it's also the case of my faculty, but I will definitely take a deeper look into this. But if there's any other program that you could recommend, that would be useful. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think we will give you, I'm going to try to give you an updated list. I'm just having a look at that list now briefly to see if there's something I can recommend while we have you here that we already have listed there. But it is perhaps due for some student feedback and some other sources. So we maybe we'll also look around for some other things, because indeed, I don't always recommend just doubling up on spell check. I would also double up on Grammarly. And your friend, as you mentioned, or peer, or other smart person that you could know, even your mom, might be able to help you check your grammar, but it's always a good idea to check it in several different sources.
Yeah, I think that you brought up a really important point, though, Romana, about these programs. Is in the end, they are just computer programs, and so they're going to give, in some cases, I mean, they're getting better and better. They're getting more sophisticated, but I don't know that they're ever going to get so sophisticated that they'll be as good as another human being, right? As far as reading your paper, telling you what's appropriate for this. Or you, right? And, I'm including you as another human being, right? They're never going to be as good as a experienced, trained writer. So they are, I think, they are really useful for catching maybe some of these little things that you should think about. That you should then, I mean, that's how you should use Grammarly or Rightful, right? You should go through and, as you said you did, Romana, and say, actually, in this case, I don't think that's the right advice, and I'm going to ignore that. So it just takes practice to know what to accept and what not to accept from those programs. But in the end, you're right that it's not going to be good in every situation, because.
No.
And this is, as far as since you mentioned the passive voice, right? This is something that keeps coming up in our classes at Masaryk and everything. Is, of course, there is a cultural difference. There's a language difference between what sort of styles are accepted and not accepted, and pretty much in every gab we've and in every class we come up against this issue, right? Of course. My sense is that Grammarly, for example, is very much focused on, I don't know if I would, but maybe I would call it a sort of progressive modern English language sort of cultural, US and UK. I'm not sure which country exactly it was developed in, but it seems to have this sort of, for example, preference for the active voice and all these things, which I have been told by students many times, I don't think I can get away with that. My teacher says that I can't use I, for example. I can't use the active voice in it. So you have to realize that it's that those programs are also coming from, just as your teachers are, coming from a particular cultural place. They may not, they will certainly, obviously with like verb tenses, purely grammatical issues, they're great. And maybe that's what you should use them for. For larger stylistic issues, yeah, that's where you're going to have to use your own judgment and we didn't say, by the way, we haven't said in this because we left it out, but I do want to say, use your teachers as well. Sometimes they may not have time, and you can sense that, but sometimes they do have time, and especially if you contact them, let's say a week or 2 weeks before the paper is due. So I probably should have included that in the week thing, but yeah, talk to your professors. They don't, they're not going to edit your paper for you, but if you have a specific question, send them an email, especially if it's a question about the assignment itself, and use them as a resource as well. And they're great for these stylistic questions like, hi, Dr. So-and-so, I saw that this web page from the UK said that I should use I in this paper, and the active voice, does that sound right to you? And maybe they'll say, well, sure, or maybe they'll say, no, you must do it this way. So that can help you decide how you need to revise as well. So don't be afraid of your professors and contacting them.
Yeah, I actually had that experience. I wrote a paper for one of my professors, and I emailed him to just kind of ask, in general, what did you think about the main argument? Was I too simplistic or was I too complicated? I wasn't sure what tone to strike in terms of communicating what I wanted to. And he emailed me back, and the thing he said is, students never ask me this. So I'm impressed to have, I'm impressed to have received your email. Here is some very detailed feedback that I can provide you, which was, uplifting for me, but then I also got my answer. So just, not being afraid to ask sometimes, even if you don't get an answer, you might. I also had found that resource sheet I was talking about. I can just share it with you briefly. There's one other source on there, of course, that I could show you, and it's called the Hemingway editor, which should also be free. And it also tries to highlight certain parts of text, for example, that can use more improvement, and you can click each one of these areas to get a further explanation. So you could try checking out this app, but this brief list of resources looks like this, and we can always, for example, share it again. But you can see for this proofreading, editing, and revising section, we can use some more sources, certainly the ones that you use. So that's one I could give you right now.
Yeah,
I hope
thanks.
it makes.
I just wanted to add that if you don't mind, I just send it the more details about using Rightful. If Romana wants, you can just check it. And there are two sites where you can do it online. So yeah, you just take the site and copy it to the internet, and it will revise. And there are two possibilities. It will revise your literature and how you cite it, and the other is about the structure of your article in general. And also it says to you like how many % of the other researchers used this structure what you want to use. So it is very nice that okay, so maybe the preposition won't be correct because it's used just 5%, so it will it is really nice. Actually, it was recommended for us from our teacher of academic writing what I attended this year. So
I really like that idea.
Just try if you want.
Yeah, I like that idea that it gives you some maybe statistics of how often certain things are used. But the one thing I would defer to, again, I think Joe's comment here is even more relevant in my opinion, because sometimes what's oftentimes repeated as a model of writing or a model of forming a sentence is not always the best way, and we could improve it to make it more concise and clear. So then maybe again, just using that human resource you have is
this is also what our teacher said, like, oh, I won't use this one because it feels not correct for me, so just skip it. So yes, there should be this last like sense of yours. So of course that not your work, not all of the work should be just revised how this program says. So of course I agree, sure.
Does anybody else have a comment about their writing or revision process, or a question, or maybe a story of how you've done it in the past?
Or a disaster, something that you tried and didn't work, so we know not to do it.
You have to encounter the disasters to encounter the successes. I can tell you that from experience. But perhaps that's maybe the culture of the last minute editor.
I have maybe like a couple of questions, which, I mean, I guess they're not really applicable to like this last week or minute fixes, but I found myself struggling with having too much time lately. And I even had to make recently major revisions. I mean, I ended up being successful, but I always end up getting into like sort of like going into a rabbit hole of like doing too much reading and not being able to stop. Like I always feel like I can do even more and I want to know even more, and then, you know, in the middle of the reading there is an idea that clicks and, oh, I should actually use this in this article, and but then I need more reading to do that. So if you have any idea, like advice how to stop doing that. I mean, I know subconsciously I also do that because I'm also a last minute person, and so this is like my subconscious way of like creating the time pressure. At the same time, I would like that to stop. And also, if you have any ideas about how to actually create interesting titles, because I always fear that what I came up with is too interesting or maybe a bit misleading. So I go with the safe option of, you know, subject and topic and column and so on. And yeah, in terms of like advice, what I would do also, I really use the find search option in Word format. So if I know there is a mistake that I would make often, or when I was proofreading, I noticed some mistake, I would go through the search and check for the rest of the document. And one more thing, which a friend of mine showed, I didn't think about that, but there is that option of, I'm not sure how those are called, but to make the spaces and paragraphs visible, like having that symbol, like that P and the dot. So if you mark that and then search for example, double spacing in between words, then it will show you as well, and you will be like able to notice those small mistakes as well. So that's something I like to use as well. But
yeah,
all your advice is great. Thank you.
Those are good suggestions. And not only the find, but if you are perhaps savvy enough to take the time, you can do the find and replace. So if you notice that you've misspelled a word really in several places, that you don't have to keep clicking, but you can find and replace all of that particular word is quite helpful. And then to turn on this text editor view of your document can also be helpful for looking at double spacing and paragraph alignment. I find that like a stylistic preference. For me, it makes me anxious, but I don't know, Joe, do you like to turn on the paragraph editor and check through your writing like that?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean. You mean the thing that shows the paragraph symbol and these?
And the 2 dots for double spacing and so on. It can be really helpful. I think for students, especially when they want to visualize it. But when I use it, I feel just personally kind of overwhelmed by the amount of symbols. So I feel like it's a type of brain orientation maybe, but it is a really good suggestion. And to answer your question,
I use that only when I want to search for the double spacing. So
okay.
I would mark it and then search for it, because I think otherwise Word will not show you double spacing if you would just click, or maybe my version of Word does not do that. But if you would just search for double spacing in the find option, it does not show it unless you mark the, again, might be just my version.
That's true. But what you can also do is when you have this find option, use speech marks or quotation marks, double space quotation marks. Then it should find the spacing issues for you. And if you really cannot find, for example, these spacing issues, you can look for, Google the Unicode symbol for space, copy that from Wikipedia, paste it into this find, and it will find it everywhere for you. It can be really helpful. For example, also for finding if you're working for working with multilingual documents, and you really need to put in those hachki for checks into the names of cities and villages and places. When you need to actually insert that symbol places, it's helpful to actually go to another source like Wikipedia, copy the character in Unicode, put it into the find option and replace all. And then maybe if I could go back and talk about your original question, you feel like you are a last minute person like me, but in a little perhaps different way, or maybe we're similar. You keep researching because you feel like there's always something you can add to your topic, and you want to keep going in different directions with it, and including as much as possible, perhaps to feel as valid as possible when you submit that final assignment. And I think that one of the things I could suggest to deal with this issue, because I often experience something similar, but for different types of longer assignments, I tend to look at what is my main research question, and what is, if I have a second one, what is my secondary research question? And that would be for a longer document. And for this, I just brainstorm visually what types of points do I want to make. So I can look at, for example, how a concept category might look for this, but that's how I really tend to organize my research question. And then I think that you can go through your document similar to how Joe described, and try to find these areas, color code them, find those areas that link back to the evidence for one of the main claims, and then the main claim itself. Perhaps I can find a diagram. Maybe Joe, it is the method you talked about, color coding and sticking to the main research question. Something to add?
I popped a couple of title writing guides into the chat. One is a PDF. I think that's a really nice one. It gives you some ideas, and then the other is a link to a web page that might help you think about titles. Yeah, titles are tough, but I mean, I think our point today was at least make sure there is a title, because if you have an hour or 5 minutes left, you can at least do that, and just your research question, or as you said, Olivera, like maybe the simplest, dumbest thing, at least there's something there. But obviously, if you have more time, yeah, you can sort of play around. Titles are maybe hard because like often they are wordplay, like especially if it's a popular article, but also even in academic articles, sometimes really expert writers are sort of playing around with the words and punning and these sorts of things. But actually in that way, it makes a great practice. Come up with maybe 5 titles, try your best, and it really is a great way of again playing around with the language if you have the time.
And then for visualizing, for example, that argument I had just mentioned, I found my let's say my resource that I like to share with students when I'm trying to explain how to frame everything or organize something around a main research question. I like to use really visual guides for myself, just because when I have a very long paper with long chunks of text, even sometimes color coding, I can get a bit lost. So I like to make something like a mind map, and we do have some programs you can do this in, but I usually make mine on paper, and I just make sure that every single one of these types of subcategories that relates to my main research topic or main research question, that I'm including evidence and claim for those things. Anything that I think could be tangential or aside from the point or an area for further research, I would make that into a separate research question and even a separate paper. Or if you really want to include it and make it a much longer paper, if you have the freedom to do that, I would make a secondary research question for that. So I think that it's not something that always has to be done in this linear way in a word processing program. I'm a huge fan of visual organization of a paper, of an argument, and of writing as well. And I turn those tangents into more papers, more writing. Other questions?
Yeah, it's really nice to hear some of your strategies. Obviously, yeah, like Abbie and I are, you know, we're both from the same place. We're native speakers from the U.S., and so obviously, as I said earlier, we have a sort of a certain like cultural background and a certain way we approach things, so it's really important for us to listen and get some even better ideas from you guys. So we appreciate the yeah, the sharing. It helps us a lot. So other ideas or other questions or concerns that we can talk about? I'm gonna send a few links in the chat just to make sure that you all know. The first one that I put in there, well, there's two links there in the chat now. One is about writing a title, but the second one there is our writing lab webpage. Go over there, give it a read, see who we are and what we're doing. We're trying to start it's basically modeled on a writing center, which is really common in the UK or the US, but less common here in the Czech Republic and in Central Europe, where most of us are living now. So we'd love your support, and we'd love your attendance at our writing lab. If you are a Maastricht University student or a faculty or staff, you can make an appointment with us to sit down for 45 minutes and chat about your writing, basically. And you can bring in a text. Of course, we won't edit it for you. You will do that, but we can read it and give you some things that we would look for if we were writing and reading and editing that text. And so visit us at the Writing Lab. Abbie, you put something else there. What's that?
I put the link to the resources page that I just showed.
Oh, okay,
where we have
great.
it's a clickable resource PDF where you can go to all those sites that we recommended for different aspects of writing. Maybe, obviously we cannot go too much into detail with this particular piece of advice, but whenever you're writing something, make sure that you allow yourself enough time and also the freedom to make multiple drafts. So if you are that kind of last minute writer like me, and you find yourself sitting down writing your essay from start to finish, one of the bits of advice I could give you is to try just once, setting aside an extra week or a pretend deadline, making that first draft, and then giving yourself the actual time to go through and revise it for a second draft. Because it's not always just about revising that one bit of writing the first time. Sometimes we have to write it first and then kind of rethink about it or re-envision it as we read through it a second time. But this would also involve perhaps some of the methods Joe described in that 1 week method as well.
Here's our YouTube channel. We're going to post, as usual, the recording. So if there was something that you missed today and want to go back and look at it, that should be up in, well, a few hours, by tomorrow anyway, probably. But we also have some other videos there, the previous gabs and some other random things about writing that we've put there. So
Yeah.
go there and
Drafting, introductions and conclusions. A lot of the things that actually go into the revision process as well. So check those out.
And we're also on Facebook, Maastricht University Writing Lab. You can find us there. So like us and follow us, and you'll find out about the next gab. We don't have the next one scheduled, but it will be sometime in the spring, or the late winter months. So we hope that you'll join us for the next time as well. Thanks to everybody who came. And yeah, maybe we'll say goodbye for today, unless there's a final thought or final question.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.